Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Martin Cooke. Martin hails from the great state of Texas and has been playing music since the age of 10, starting on piano and then migrating to a real instrument, the drums. After earning his stripes at Henson Recording Studios as staff engineer, he now works as an independent engineer, mixer, and producer on records with people that like to make music. Martin has worked with the likes of Death Cab for Cutie, Seawolf, Benches, Ultra Q, and of Monster and Men. Former guest of the show and fellow podcaster Travis Ferentz recommended I reach out to Martin, who's graciously agreed to join me on the air. So with all this to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So you kind of told me a little bit before we kind of got into this, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you ended up doing the things that you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, as you stated earlier, I am from Texas. I grew up there and studied percussion as a kid. I was a drummer. And I went to school at the University of Houston for a few years. I started out as like music ed, and then kind of wanted to get into composition. And that eventually kind of led me down a path of like, well, what kind of composing do I like? I really liked arranging stuff. So I figured it kind of got me into like the film score world in a weird way. That plus the Lord of the Rings extended DVD collection because I loved all that behind the scenes stuff.
Nice.
And then, so I ended up transferring to Berkeley and Boston because they had a bit more of a progressive, modern take on, film score and just music in general. And that led me into some synthesis classes where I was learning to manipulate stuff, which then led me into some recording classes, which, kind of excited that part of my brain. And I kind of just did both. I dual majored in synthesis and music production, which sounds like a lot, but it's like a lot of the classes overlap, so it was really easy. I just had to stay, I think, one extra semester. But it was fun because on one side I got to do sound design and some scoring, and the other side I got to make records. And then I moved to LA in 2007 thinking that I could like work in a studio Monday through Friday and like do sound design on the weekends. And then I got a job at Henson Recording, and I worked for 90 days straight without a day off. So I never got to do any sound design. But yeah. So I did about 6 years at Henson as a runner, and between being a runner and a staff engineer. And then I kind of planned on leaving at about that time, and it just so happened that I got a call from an engineer that I had assisted a lot with, and he told me that Rich Costi had needed someone new. So I went and met Rich and started working for him like 2 weeks later, and was with him for about 5 years. And then I guess that was by 2018, I left and became independent. Had a studio at my house and that whole thing. Went down that journey. Amazing.
I'd love to ask you a little bit more about working with Rich. What was your job like working for him? Like what exactly did that entail? Like being, his like engineer. What was that like?
Well, we would split our time over the course of a year between mixing and production. I guess split isn't the right word. We did a lot of mixing. So, I mean, Rich is, I think, prominently known as a mixer these days. And we would only take on like 1 or 2 productions a year. We would do some additional production stuff. So basically, when we were mixing, it was my job I was basically his mix assistant. We had another guy that would help with prep. We had like another assistant that would help with prep stuff, especially if we were overwhelmed, because sometimes we'd mix 2 or 3 records at once and it'd just be a lot going on.
Wow.
And so a lot of it is like, getting the mixes up, because like when I was working for him, we always worked on an analog console. So we were still doing full analog mixes, full outboard gear, So it's get the mix up, get it matched to the rough as best we could. He would jump in and do his thing. If we finished a mix in a day, it would be print, take notes, recall, get the next one up for the next day. Or maybe it would be like, we're not finished today, but let's document where we are, and then we got to recall this other artist from yesterday because we got notes from them.
Wow.
Do those notes.
Oh my God.
Print that, and then pull the other one back up, So it was a lot. He actually had 2 engineers working for him as well as an assistant. So between me and this other guy, it was basically like 20-hour days, just constantly doing stuff. Yeah, the very first night I worked for him, I had to recall a song for this band, and I had never worked in his studio before. I'd been there and met him, but it's It's an SSL-G, which I'm familiar with, but I had to recall this song, and like I couldn't figure out any of the recall notes because like nothing made sense at the time. There wasn't a very good recall system, and I was there all night. Like he came in at like 9 a.m. and I was still there. Like I just like trying to, and it was mixing out of Cubase. Like Rich was really adamant on using the DAW that the track was created in because he felt like there was rather than just printing audio all the time. Sometimes people would give us audio, but if it was something unique, so I'm like, I've never used Cubase, so I'm like trying to figure out, it was a thing.
Trying to figure out the G console and the DAW at the same time.
Yeah, well, luckily I knew the desk already because that's what we had at Henson. But
right. But you didn't understand the recall notes.
Yeah, it was just all like it was a chaotic time because there was just so much happening. It was like a lot to keep in front of. But that was like the mixing side, and then production side, I would basically be the engineer and be in charge of everything on that end, and those are pretty standard, like how you would make a record. A band comes in, we usually would do full tracking to get like drum takes, stuff like that. In the case of a band like Death Cab, we did a lot of stuff to tape on the first album. Mm-hmm. So we would track, most of the drums on the album, the first album we did, which is called Kintsugi, I'm pretty sure most of those came off of tape. And then we go and, do overdubs and all that stuff. But there's also times like we did 2 records in Iceland with the Monsters of Men where I basically packed his whole studio and took it with us. Like everything, almost everything.
Did you ship it on a plane or on like a shipping container?
I think this was all plane stuff because we were like mixing the week before in LA, and then the next week we were in Iceland, and
oh my god,
big racks of gear, and I mean obviously we couldn't take a console, but it was a lot of work, but it was fun. I had some great experiences. Just working and meeting with great artists, and I think it's good training to be a producer when you're watching someone like that and involved with something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I actually was curious. I was curious to hear if you have like maybe like one takeaway or like lesson that you could distill for the audience from just like working with him. What would be like the one thing that you carry with you today?
Well, Rich had a big thing that we would always say, like he would always say proof of concept. So if someone had an idea, like we would always try to go down that avenue and explore it. Even if it was just like, maybe we could do some, I don't know, this is a lame example. Maybe this could have strings on it. It's like, all right, well, mock up a string thing and let's see if it works. Like just trying something because an idea popped into someone's head was always valuable. And then like we would execute it just to kind of, like we said, proof of concept. Let's see if this works. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does, or sometimes it leads you down another path that you weren't thinking about originally, which was kind of happened a lot actually. You would like, oh, let's do like a cool reverby guitar sound. It's like, all right, well, let's patch that in, and maybe someone patched a pedal in incorrectly, and it was like the distortion was after the reverb or something, whatever, and you come up with some cool sound. So I always try to do that, where if I'm working with artists, either in production or mixing, if there's ideas, if someone feels strongly about something, like let's explore that, let's go down that road. He would definitely always do that. And it would always be like, and if it was something that we were going for, we would like work at it until it was right. Like guitar tones, things like that. We would spend hours sometimes getting guitar tones just to make sure that they're exactly what we wanted and stuff. Which is, a privilege we had working with bands on labels with budgets and time.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about, it sounds like it was like that old school kind of, industry thing where you just had tons of time to try to make interesting things, like sounding interesting, working analog, working like, with the desk, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Do you find like today, like what I'm assuming it's a little different now that you're working on your own, like the budgets are probably a bit smaller, time is limited. It's probably a little bit harder to do the proof of concept thing these days, or maybe not.
I think that there's plenty of time. Like people have time, unless it's some obvious, deadline thing, seasonal thing. But budgets, yeah, it's like I was just with a band last weekend, and we had 2 days to basically get live drums, bass, and keyboards done in a studio on 9 songs. So it's like the band's got to be rehearsed. Like I know that we can do guitars and vocals and stuff later, but like I don't have my studio is in a commercial space, but I just have a vocal booth. Like I can't track a full drum kit and the keyboard. And the big thing was the keyboard player, because we had a piano and a Rhodes and a Whirly and a Hammond with a beat with a Leslie setup. It was, so we had 2
full
days
package.
to get 9 songs done. Yeah. So that's definitely, that's definitely a struggle these days. Because it's fun when you have the time in the studio. It's like, oh, let's try a different drum sound. Let's move some things around. But when you got 2 days to do, get everything for a record done, it's like once you got sounds, you just got to go, and a lot of it you got to think about later, which is, I don't really like doing that. I like to have intent with things, but you also have to be realistic about what you're doing and about your budget and your client and all that kind of stuff. So
it's like striking the right balance between, committing and recording with intent versus kind of safeguarding yourself.
Yeah, and just being realistic. I mean, I read this quote. I don't know. I can't remember if it was something I saw off Travis's Instagram page, and it might have been. I'm so bad at remembering anything that I've seen online because it all just blurs together.
Indeed it does.
I think it was one of his guests. It was a blip, and he said something like, "It's my job to do the best that I can with the resources available." And I was like, that's pretty much how it is these days. Like if you've got time and you've got budget, then you can, explore that as much as you can. But if you don't have either of those, then you can only do what you can do.
Yeah. I think it's hard. Production is really hard because I feel like a lot of us who do production, we're kind of perfectionists and we know exactly what we want to do. And like, it's just not always in the cards. And then all of a sudden you're like losing money, or
right.
You're working way. It's like really hard. Do you struggle with that kind of, that perfectionistic battle?
I do. And I think it depends on the situation. Like I tend to work with bands a lot where there's, multiple people in the band playing instruments and then me kind of helping guide that. But occasionally I do work on, solo projects with people where it's just that artist and me.
Right.
And that's more difficult for me because you're just burdened with everything. It's like, all right, I'm programming the drums, like I'm coming up with the synth sounds. I'm, coming up with guitar tones and things. Whereas like when you have a band, you've got, an army of people that are involved and for their own particular, tasks. But it is very rewarding when you are doing something solo because you're definitely involved more on a creative level. And it's a bit more, there's less lines you have to stay inside, I guess, there's definitely less egos to deal with. You don't have to worry about, dealing with guitar players and bass players and drummers and things like that. But so it's a bit of a balance, but I find it more difficult when I'm doing the solo stuff because I'm very like, because there's just so much you have to cover. And I'm very much like you said, just wanting everything to be the best that it can be.
And you can do everything, right? Like with the band, you have the limitations of what that drummer is capable of playing and what that, when it's you being able to reprogram it or, or I don't know, keep mixing
I find that
keep tweaking.
I find that I'm very reactionary. Like I like to hear what someone presents and then think of a way to work with that, make it better, make it cooler or whatever, So when I'm also having to come up with the content, it's like parts of my brain it's like the side that's creating is overwhelming the side that's being reactionary. And I feel like I'm better as a reactionary person. Because if I work with a band and the drummer comes with the part, I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool if we made it sound like this. And I can just quickly like try something versus me just, first of all, just trying to think of a part. And then what that will sound like. That's just the way my head works. So,
well, I'm curious what you listened to as a kid growing up, like, because based on like the music that you're working on versus like you wanted to do like arranging and synthesis. What were you like? What were you listening to as a kid?
Man, that's a good question. when I was like a kid, like middle school and junior high, I was so into drums and drummers. Like I just was, it was the coolest thing to me. So I
Like
was listening
Neil
to like,
Peart. It was like Rush.
yeah,
Love
no,
it.
exactly. I had Neil's setup. Like
It's like the
I,
Freaks
like,
and
had, you know,
Geeks. I don't know if you saw that. Freaks and Geeks.
yeah. I had like the full on, like I would just buy more drums for my kits, and I had it in like the Freddie Gruber arc with the whole thing and the cymbals and the wind chimes. And yeah, I listened to a lot of that. I listened to a lot of actually like jazz and big band, because that was all like, when you're like learning, at least for me, it was like rock drummers, other than a few, were like, whatever, they're not real drummers, they're just playing time. Like that's how I felt as a kid. Like to me, it was like jazz was like real music for drummers and things like that. So yeah, I listened to a lot of jazz. I listened to a lot of like big band stuff, but then I would listen to like a ton of Rush. And like even like it sounds so weird saying it, but like one of my favorite bands as a kid was Dave Matthews Band, because Carter Beauford was such an incredible drummer.
Oh yeah, they're amazing drummer.
Yeah,
They had some sick grooves.
So, yeah, I listened to a lot of that, and then like.
By the way, Rush was my first concert was Rush, 9th grade.
Oh wow,
yeah,
that's a great first concert.
I should remember which album it was, and I don't at the moment. But they had like these washing machines on the stage behind them. Like I don't know if you would remember which it was around. I guess if I was a freshman in high school, it was about in 2001 or so, maybe 2002.
Oh, that was probably. Oh man, I don't even remember, because they had those on a few tours, I think.
It was epic. It was like Madison Square Garden,
Yeah. I got to assist on their last record, on the mixing of their last record.
No shit.
Yeah, it was like one of the last projects I did there.
That must have been like a full loop for you.
Dude, it was wild, because I was actually playing golf with a friend of mine, and my manager from Henson texted me, and she was like, "Do you want to do a session with Nick Raskulinix, who I'd worked with before on a couple Alice in Chains records?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love Nick." She's like, "It's going to just be mix assisting. He's we're working with Rush." And I was just like, I literally just like stopped in my tracks, because when I was a kid, let me tell you, when I was a kid, when I would get home from school, I would watch Neil Peart's drumming video on VHS every day. In my mom's bedroom, like on a little combo TV VCR thing. I would watch it every day. And I remember calling my mom that day and being like, "Do you remember that tape I used to watch it? Yeah, I'm going to get to work with those guys." And like, I don't really get starstruck very much, but the day that I met Neil, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. Like, it was wild. And he's like he was very, very private.
Yeah.
And I kind of gushed a little bit, and Nick, the producer, who's a like very good friend of mine, like, and we're buds, he was just like, "Dude, you got to be careful. Like, Neil's, we're not really into that. He might shut down." And he was so nice. And I told him that I had his, VHS tape. And the next day he brought me a Blu-ray of his newest drumming thing, and he signed it. And we became like,
wow.
He was just like, he was very quiet and gentle, and like a very soft-spoken guy who's also like 6'5". It was insane. He would just like tower over you. But he was great. And like working with the three of those guys was so just rewarding. Like seeing three friends that have been playing music for like 40 years that still enjoyed each other was just magical.
Amazing. Yeah, they're a great
And
band.
when we were working on the first Death Cab record I did, we were talking about drum tuning, and we were thinking about the tom sound that, like, I can't remember which Rush record we were referencing, but Rich was like, "Man, I wonder how they got those sounds." And I was like, "I could just email Neil. I have his email." And I emailed Neil like, "Hey, how did you get the tom sound on blah, blah, blah?" And he wrote this like dissertation on tom tuning, where like, "Did you ever take the bottom heads off?" "No, I never took the bottom." It was like, it was just the coolest thing. And then Rich's kid ended up going to school with Neil's kid, so they actually became friends outside of that. But anyway, I don't know how we got into that. Oh yes, I listened to a lot of Rush when I was a kid.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. I was like really curious, because you have like, it's just like such a range, like to be doing the kind of music that you're doing today from like that arrangement, background. It seems like so different.
I didn't really ever fully get into film score and arrangement. Like I liked doing it. Like it was it was like math, you know, it was like problem solving. How do you get these things to work? I think I took one film score class at Berkeley before I switched out of it. So I never, but I don't know. I just I like music, so I think it kind of doesn't matter, especially nowadays with the exposure. Like I think about what I was so like uppity about as a kid and what things I didn't listen to, you know. Like my parents had never played the Beatles when I was a kid. We were a Beach Boys family, so I knew all the Beach Boys. Yeah,
no way.
So like I mean, obviously I knew who the Beatles were, but I wasn't like super knowledgeable about them. Like, but I mean, I listened to Pet Sounds a million times as a kid because that's what my parents loved. And when I finally like got into the Beatles, like wasn't until college. I was like, oh, this is what everyone's talking about. I get it now, you know.
Yeah.
And then when you realize the like impact that they had, it's like,
yeah, no shade to the Beach Boys, but really no shade to the Beach Boys, but like I don't know, for me like they're not even comparable, you know. Like
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, it's like two powerful forces that are just like feeding off of each other that really don't have anything to do with each other, you know. Exactly.
Yeah, it's such different music. Yeah. Like the sense of songwriting is just completely different, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm more of a Beatles guy, obviously, or not obviously, like most people, I guess, or 90% of families. I don't even know what the percentage is. Amazing. Well, let's bring it forward a little bit. You know, I'd love to hear about how you find artists to work with today, or how they find you. What does that look like? You know, them discovering you, or you discovering them.
Most of the time, it's people reaching out to me these days. Yeah, usually, I mean, it's kind of like how I've always kind of designed my career as like people listen to something that I did and they like it, and then you get hired for that, which is the very old school way of doing it. And I'm not good at selling myself. Like, I don't do a lot of social media stuff. Like, and I understand why people do it. I'm just like, it's just not me, my personality, you know?
Yeah.
And that's probably not great for today's like economy and how like stuff happens. But like, I don't know, like if something, I try to promote the stuff I work on, and I try to promote the bands that I work with and my artists, because I obviously believe in it if I'm going to work on it. But like, doing things like posting daily reels and like, I just, I don't even know what I would even do. Like, I don't know. It's just not me. So yeah, I kind of rely on people enjoying what I do, and them telling other people, or someone hearing it and seeing my name. So yeah, sometimes I get hit up randomly through my website for work. I do have some managers I work with. It's a very casual relationship with them, and I do some work with their artists as well. They mostly manage bands and artists. I think I'm one of maybe two producer engineer people that they have. But yeah, I don't know. It's mostly word of mouth for me. I'll hit up bands that I like or artists I like on social media, and just I'm never like, hey, let me work with you. I'm always like, I like your sound, enjoy your.
That's the way to do it.
I just feel like it's just a bit, I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. If someone was like, let me make you blah, blah, blah. It just feels a bit imposing, I guess.
Yeah.
But again, I'm also terrible at selling myself.
I would feel the same way. Yeah. I think I just spoke with someone named Sampura, who you may or may not know. And he was talking about, like, it's like you got to start with the content, make sure that your music sounds good. It's like,
yeah, because in the end, that's what matters, really. It's like you can have 1 million followers, but if like people don't like what you're doing, then why does it matter? But I understand the point of exposure and all that. I get that. But yeah, you have to have a product that people want in the end, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think just with like the bands that you've worked with, that's probably like massively helpful to kind of just like
it's funny. It is
keep that cycle, or
it is. Mm-hmm. It is and it isn't, because it's like when you work with bands like Death Cab for Cutie or Monsters of Man, I know these like big label bands that have budgets and stuff, and then you get these like indie bands. They're like, we want to do that. And I'm like, all right, well, how many days can you afford in a studio to track this or that? And they're like, well, 1 day. And it's like, all right, well, But yeah, I mean, I think people appreciate that. What you've worked on and what you've put effort into, and hoping that you can help them apply that, to whatever they were working on.
It was Travis told me when I interviewed him for my show That like people think that people think that he gets work because of his Imagine Dragons credits or whatever, and he gets work from like the little albums that people really loved, that was that musicians loved or whatever. So it's like you never know
Yeah.
what's actually like driving that needle forward, or pushing.
Yeah,
the
I did
needle.
an EP with this band called Ultra Q last year. Just like a little punk rock band from Oakland that I've known through other bands. And when that EP came out, I got more emails and like, social media contacts because of that little 6-song EP than I ever have with like Death Cab or Monsters of Men and stuff like that.
That's crazy.
Well, I think it's mostly because they're younger kids. These guys are like in their 20s, and there's other younger kids that are especially in Oakland and in California, like punk, like rock music is coming back, like guitar music is coming back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young bands out there playing that kind of music. So I think it seems more accessible to them to see other young people versus, a band like Death Cab or whatever that's been around for 20 years and that maybe seems a bit more unattainable for these younger kids. But
that's super cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like you're getting pigeonholed into these kinds of genres, or is this like the genre that you want to work in, or like what does that feel like for you?
No, I don't really feel like I just last Friday and Saturday I was recording an Americana country band, so like I don't really feel like I have like a certain thing that I do. I don't know if that's good or bad. I like it because it's I get to try different stuff, and I don't get. Yeah. I think I would get bored doing the same thing over and over again. But I'm also like I think as a producer, I don't feel like I have a sound or whatever. Like my whole point of view is like I'm here to facilitate your ideas, whatever that is. And I guess the same way in mixing. Like if I'm just mixing a record, it's like I'm just trying to help you get from where you left off to where you want to be, whatever that is, if that's a mile long gap or if that's a 10-foot gap, sometimes. So, that's just kind of how I approach it. So I really don't think I get stuck in anything. I definitely have not only been working on punk rock bands for the last year. Yeah. There's a couple of fun projects I had, but I'll mix electronic stuff, pop stuff, singer-songwriter, like it doesn't matter to me, I guess. Yeah,
amazing. So these days it's like a mix of producing and mixing. Like, do you usually mix the stuff you produce? Is that usually like how it works?
Yeah, almost always. Actually, I don't think I've ever outsourced a mix because I come from a engineer. I'm a engineer producer, not a songwriter producer. Like, and I tell my clients that like, look, I'm not going to help you write a song. Like, if you have a demo down and most of the parts are there, then I'm going to help you make it sound cool and help you with the arrangement. And like, maybe I'll come up with some ideas, but like, I'm not a blank page person when it comes to, I'm not a songwriter. I don't have that skill set, and I'm fine with that. I don't need to have that skill set. So that being said, when I am producing, like the end result is already in my head of like what it's going to sound like mixed. Yeah. So it makes sense for me to do that. But yeah, I split I've been actually doing quite a bit of production in the last year or two. I think that's mainly, I'm guessing because COVID's, relatively over and people are out and about again. Because obviously before that, it was just a lot of mixing. People were doing everything themselves. But I don't know. I kind of split my time between the two. I think I go in waves. Like right now, I'm like ready to just mix some stuff because I'm tired of the burden of producing sometimes. But
yeah, I go through that also, that cycle of like, okay, I just want to like actually make something, and then so it's like just I've made too many things. I've got a family already. I don't have time for this. Like I feel like like doing an actual production is almost like another marriage or another like family because it's just so like it takes so much energy, like emotional soul energy.
I was explaining this to a friend of mine recently. She was asking me about mixing, and I was like, it's like a relationship. Like you have a relationship with the song. Yeah. And I guess you can apply this into production just on a longer term, but it's like sometimes you get along really well and it's great and it goes by, fast. And sometimes you really have to work on your relationship with the song and figure out what it really wants, like another person.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle, and sometimes you need to,
Yeah.
talk to somebody about it or whatever. But in the end,
you need some couples counseling or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's totally. Yeah, it's song production is just like it's a whole beast. Yeah, so I definitely am with you in terms of like the cycles, and sometimes you just want to mix because it's like easier. It's like even if it's like
the big picture stuff is usually done by the time you're mixing, where you don't have to. You're not creating this. I mean, I think it's really hard. It's difficult to create, like just a big kind of the general idea of a song for an artist. Like I think that's tough and it's exhausting.
Yes,
it's fun. It's definitely fun. The process is fun, but it can be really exhausting. Whereas when you're mixing, it's like most of that's done. You're just trying to dial it in and add that extra thing.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your approach to mixing. What does it look like for you these days? I'm assuming you're not mixing on an analog desk. I'm assuming you're at least hybrid or semi in the box, or what does it look?
I'm hybrid. I sum. I have a Shadow Hills Equinox that I sum through. So I have like 16. I think I only use like 16 channels of that thing. So I come out of Pro Tools into the Equinox into Overstayer stereo voltage controller, which is just kind of my analog compressor thing, and then that gets printed back through a Burl converter. So it's like transformers into transformers into transformers, which is nice. And I've just gotten used to that over the years, and I've been trying recently to get away from it, where like the way I have my template set up is like everything kind of routes to these kind of master subgroups based on instrument, and then those route out to the Equinox, and then but I can easily just route those internally to my internal mix bus and be in the box with very, very simple, very quickly. So sometimes I'll start like that, and I'll feel pretty good about the mix. I'm like, oh, let me just route it out and back in, and then it's just like. I'm like, oh crap! But
so no offline bounce for you.
No offline bounces, and then I have like eight channels of hardware I/O. So usually I'll have like a vocal chain set up. I've got some weird like analog stereo boxes that are fun that add some like widening and things, and I have like a one line for guitar pedals that I'll use as effects and things like that. But generally, like if I dial something in with an analog piece of gear, I just print it. Really the vocal chain is the only thing that ever stays live. If I like compress a bass with a distressor or a limit or whatever I'm using, I just dial it in, I print it, I take a recall note of what the settings were in case I want to go back to it. But 9 out of 10 times I never go back to it. It's just there.
You just print it in, you leave it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, it just saves the resources. I don't have to recall it later. It's just done,
What is it your outboard chain usually look like for lead vocals?
I usually do an EQ compression chain right now. So I have a Pultec EQP1 A3, one of the new ones, and that goes into a Magic Death Eye tube limiter.
Oh, nice.
And that's usually always there, unless it's like an electronic song where or something that's not a less traditional vocal sound, or if it's already so dialed in from whoever sent me the mix,
Yeah.
But most of the time I just run it through that. Honestly, a lot of times I don't even have the EQ in, because the Death Eye sounds so good. It just, you can like bury that needle and it just sounds better. You don't hear compression or anything. It's just a great piece of gear. I love it.
Wow. Do you know Ion? Because
yeah, I do. I met Ion through Travis, and then we demoed a couple of his units when I was working for Rich, and then Rich bought a pair of his compressors, and then he told all the guys at Electric Lady, so like Elmhurst bought one and Brower bought one. So I sold a fair amount of units for Ion, and a couple of years ago he gave me a discount, which was not, there's air quotes for the listeners. It's just basically like, yeah, if you come pick it up, I'll shave off a little bit of money, but mine's cool. I have one of the first blackface ones.
That's
and the
dope.
model number actually says future on it. It doesn't say mono, which is kind of cool. But no, Ion's a great guy.
That's dope. I've been in touch with him. We'll see if he ends up coming on, because he agreed and then didn't, and then we'll see. He may or may not show up on the show. But also, what's his name? Tim O'Sullivan from Barefoot also like swears by it. A lot of people swear by
Nice.
it.
I mean,
Yeah, I haven't tried one out, but
they're great. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like you don't know how great it is until you hear it, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
yeah. Based on what you're saying, do you feel like in the box isn't quite there yet? Like analog still has a thing that you
I
find
think,
is necessary?
I think for certain things, like time-based stuff, like reverbs, delays, things like that, modulation, plugins are great. You know, I mean, I have a couple weird boxes, like some weird old Bucket Brigade delays and pedals that are definitely do like one-trick pony things. And I think compression and EQ generally sounds really good in the box. There's something about the chaos though of summing, of just the randomness in channels that adds a width and depth, all that generic stuff that everyone talks about. But
Right.
I mean, it's true. It's like I don't know.
Yeah.
And the big thing with the Equinox is I have a really old one. It doesn't look anything like the modern ones. I bought it from a roadie of a band we worked with years ago because Rich had been testing one and I loved the way it sounded. So I just we happened to be working with a band and they were like, oh, our roadie has one of those. He's selling it. And I bought it from him. But the transformers and they just sound a certain way. And I've got, and especially in the bottom end, like they have just this big extension. And it's almost like it is an EQ curve, basically. And I've gotten very used to that EQ curve. So when I'm not using it, I find that I'm like struggling a bit. I'm like, why does this not sound like it should, And then I plop it through there and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why, because it's such a big part of the sound. And that being said, so the Burl converter as well. Like those things are massively colored.
Yeah.
So that, for me, that's what it is. And it's just because this is how I decided to work. I wasn't like, I'm all going to be, I mixed on consoles for years when I was still working at Henson and obviously when we were working for Rich. Mm-hmm. And I listened to back some of my old console mixes and I love them. But they just feel different because it's just a completely different process. This is just where I ended up. And I'm sure if I would have started in the box, I would have found a way that I really liked. I think, there's obviously no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah,
I just
totally.
have created this workflow over the last 10 plus years of doing it this way, and I like it.
Yes.
And every time I try to change, it's a struggle. So I just keep it how it is,
Yeah, I love how like I get so many answers about these things, like people that want to like stay on top of the trends, want to get in the box, are interested in Atmos, people who don't give two F's about that, and like it's like really like you got to just do what you enjoy,
Exactly. Like if you're not having fun at the end of the day, then why are you doing it? Like it just doesn't, like who cares, like
Yeah.
if you're like recording to a Porta studio and that's fun to you and it sounds good, then just do that. Like, and there are people that do that, who cares?
Yeah. That's great, man. So in terms of like your the technicalities of how you're mixing, I know you're a drummer. I want to get to your drum sounds as well, but the guitar thing you do so well. Like I don't know, like that those kind of indie guitars that sound like they just sound great, and they also cut through really nicely. Like I don't know, do you have any philosophies when it comes to either tracking guitars or mixing guitars? How to make them just kind of really sit really well on the track but still sound so nice?
I actually, tracking guitars is like one of my least favorite things to do because guitars are such sensitive, multi-layered instruments. Like
Right.
everything from strings to pickups to intonation. It's a ridiculous instrument that you can tune it and then put your hand in a position to play a chord and then it's out of tune because it's not, it's such a complex thing, but it's also so much fun because of like all the pedals and things like that. So, I generally leave it up to the guitar players to dial their tones. And if I feel like we can change something, we change something. But I don't know. I don't know if I have a like specific philosophy for guitars other than like making sure that they're loud when they need to be loud and in your face, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I overthink it too much. Whereas like drums, I think about all the time because I'm a drummer and I understand the physics of the instrument, and I like drums to be felt. I like to feel the kicks in my chest and things like that. Yeah, guitars they're perplexing. It's like you can listen to them on your own and they're like great, and then as soon as you put them in a track, they're just like eating up too much space, or they're complex instruments. They take up a lot. And it's funny because like you look at the waveform or the amount of energy that's in like a guitar sound versus a drum sound. The drum sound's massive. It's taking up all of this energy. And a guitar track could be like, so much smaller than that. But as soon as it's inserted, it's just like,
Really
I
good.
can't hear anything else,
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. I mean, obviously, it's the
It's
way
also
our
because
ears are
the
programmed.
transients of the drums are so short, right? And then those guitar waves
exactly.
just kind of just keep going, right? Like
Exactly. I don't know. I just try to
ever
make
present.
I just try to make things work together. I know that's such a dumb generic response, but I don't know. I don't really.
Mm-hmm. Do you usually mic cabs like when you're recording guitars? I'm assuming it's like
Yeah, most of the time. The last couple of things that band Ultra Q I was talking about, we kind of had a little bit of a talk beforehand, and I was like, because we were just like, let's do some weird stuff on this. Let's like try things differently, which we did. And a lot of the guitar tones on that EP are DI, like pedals only, or I've been using a Palmer speaker simulator a lot, where we'll take the output of a head, whether it's a stack or just a combo, and go into the speaker simulator and use that, because it still sounds like an amp, but it's way more direct. Like it's very, very, there's no actual
room.
filtering of a speaker. There's no filtering of a microphone, or you still run it through a mic pre, but you can get these really cool direct sounds that still sound like amps, but that aren't necessarily, the speaker has so much to do with the sound. So
yes.
When you take that out of the equation and it's more controlled, you can definitely get some cooler sounds. And like the bass on that record, I think is all like DI through one of my Overstayer boxes. Like we didn't use a bass amp at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like trying things different.
Yeah. In terms of like compressing guitars in the mixing stage, like is it depends on the source, or do you have like a particular thing that you like to do?
I'll only really compress guitars if it's like a picked melodic thing. Obviously, if it's like chords, the amp is doing most of the compression already.
Amazing.
Or we'll have a guitar pedal that's doing compression. I will sometimes parallel compress guitars, but more as like a frequency needed thing. Like if the guitar is really bright and it needs more mid range or something, because the more you compress shit, the more mid range usually pops out. So I'll usually parallel something and bring that in to help that, as opposed to EQing it, because I feel like EQing guitars is just it's so noticeable because there's so many harmonics, and as soon as you hone in on one of those, you start to hear. I feel like you start to hear the
so interesting
the resonances and things like that. So yeah, I mean,
I find the guitar to be like the easiest instrument to EQ. Electric guitar, not acoustic guitar. Like I don't know. I feel like when I EQ electric guitars, it takes EQ so well. Not acoustics. Acoustics you have to be very careful with. but it's interesting you say that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also depending on like how distorted it is. How complex it is.
Right.
But I don't know. I like to do pretty broad stroke stuff, I guess is what I'm saying. Rather than like, unless it's a corrective thing. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So let's get to drums now. Yeah, I love the drums on the records that I listen to. What's your? I mean, I guess it's like it's always so source dependent. Like what's the band trying to accomplish?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like everything's like that. I mean, if you have a good player with a good instrument in a half decent room with a half decent input chain, like it's going to be fine. Like it doesn't matter if you're in the fanciest room in the world. Like if your instrument and your player isn't what it needs to be, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
As far as tracking drums, it's pretty basic. Like I don't do anything crazy. I usually have, obviously like individual mics on the drums, overhead, some kind of room thing. I like to usually put one kind of weird mic somewhere, and generally I'll use it on the like what I call the crotch position, or the kind of just over just over the batter side of the kick drum hoop, which is a fairly common thing. Mm-hmm. Some people like to put it kind of below, in between the batter head and the bottom of the snare. That's definitely more punchy, but it's kind of that one mic thing that you can get, and then I usually track it pretty mellow and then do something with it later, like overcompress it or distort it or whatever, put a flanger on it or something, like some kind of weird thing. But I've done things where we've like, put microphones in trash cans and record like resonant stuff. I mean, a bit more experimental, but I mean, generally I try to keep things pretty simple and then work the production later. If I'm allowed to, like if I have a desk, then it's different. If you're tracking on a console, then like you have so much routing. Like I'll hook up, like I have the Overstayer stereo modular channel, which is one of the coolest. I don't even know what you'd call it. It's just an input. It's got mic pre, EQ, compression, distortion, amazing filters. It has parallel mixing options on the output. It's just the coolest box. And like when we did the last Death Cab record, I just had that on the stereo cue off of the SSL. So I could send anything to it any time in the analog domain and print it in phase with whatever. So like a lot of the times that would just be up, and depending on what we were doing with drums, I'd send the overheads there in parallel, or just the kick and snare or something, or what are the rooms, or the hi-hat mic, whatever, because that thing can go insane. It can take the most basic sound to something you never thought it could sound like before with what it can do. So if it's those kind of situations, I like having that. Or we'll have like a guitar pedal chain up on a send where you can just go, let's put the snare through this in parallel and get some cool, delays or something that someone can respond off of. I like doing that stuff if it's possible. A lot of times it's not, because you're not in a studio with a big desk. But generally tracking it's simple. That's a long-winded answer. Mixing wise, I definitely took a lot of cues from Rich, right? As far as like how he liked to process drums, which was generally Rich did he always had like some kind of cool parallel compression thing happening. I think I landed on the one of the UAD channelers, the Zener. It's kind of where I ended up, because I like that thing because it can get pumpy if you want it to, or it can just kind of hold the drums down and you blend that in and you get just that kind of constant support underneath. So like I'll compress drums at a parallel and on the bus. I don't usually compress them too much at the individual level unless it's
really
stylistically called for,
including the kick drum. Like, so the kick will like hit that drum bus really hard and it'll go down. Yeah,
like I said, unless I really want it to be like kicky, clicky, or snappy or something like that. But a lot of it comes from the parallel. There'll be like a stereo parallel that I usually try to keep unlinked if I can, so that the left and rights are kind of moving, so you get a bit of width.
Yeah.
And then I also have like a mono parallel that's usually like just a slammed 1176 that you kind of can blend in, usually just kick and snare to just like really park that center image. But again, it depends on the track too, because like if it's a programmed track or if it's a drum sound, an acoustic sound that has lots of samples already in it, then sometimes you don't need that stuff because those things take care of that already.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make it...
Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
For drums, for me, it's like they got to be big, but they also have to be dynamic. They can't just be hammered the whole way, because that's just like that's not what drums sound like, Like they need to be moving. They need to help the song move, and kind of like guide the rest of the instruments that way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Dynamics are becoming a lost thing in today's productions. You know what I mean?
It's crazy. It's so true, because like when you hear a record that has good dynamics, it's like, it's so cool. Like,
it's refreshing. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you're into that band Wolf Alice, but they put out an album last year called Blue Weekend, and like some of her vocals are mixed so quietly in some of those songs, and I love it because I'm literally like leaning in, trying to listen to what she's saying. And there's an Irish band that I've been really into called Gilla Band. They used to be called Girl Band, and they're like this, I don't even know they're like kind of this post-punk noise band, but they'll go from like a hi-hat and a snare drum and a vocal to like full-on clipping distortion and then back within 3 bars, and it's just like, it's exhilarating. It's really cool. Yeah.
I went down a little bit of a Death Cab rabbit hole today when I was checking out your stuff, and I know you didn't work on this record, but on the what's it called, the Narrow Stairs record, like the Bixby Canyon Bridge that opening track, they just like it's so quiet and then it's so massive.
Yeah,
And
they closed with that at the show.
They clip like crazy. It's like really distorted, I think, you know? Like
Yeah,
when they get to
I
at the
don't.
end, it's crazy.
That I don't. Chris used to, when Chris was still in the band and he was producing. They were. That may have been a Radar session, or maybe it was on tape. I don't know, but a lot of it they did to Radar. But I know he liked the way that thing sounded. But yeah, like that. It's just so, and it translates live so great too when you see a band, and it's just like Death Cab closed with Bigsby Canyon Bridge at the LA show a couple weeks ago.
That's so cool.
And it's just a great song to just like open up and like pour out every last bit that they have, you know, at the end of the night.
That's
they used
cool.
to do it with Transatlanticism, and then they would do it with this song. But
I
yeah,
love
it's
that
just
song. Yeah.
I mean, dynamics are such an important thing to music. It's like
when I was talking to Mikko Gordon, who worked on the Smile record, and he also does front of house for them. He was telling me that when he's recording them when he's mixing them live, he literally will like throw the fader up like very slowly from like nothing to extremely loud, and it's like that has so much power on the it captivates the audience so much, and it's just with mastering and the loudness thing, it's such a bummer that we can't really have that full effect anymore.
Well, and, even in mixing, like being able to like do moves and stuff is so important. And we got into this like rabbit hole one time of listening to like high res, like 192K mixes in Rich's studio one time. And we were listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit. And there's a kick sample that Andy is like writing on the on the ones basically. And I never noticed it before until someone pointed it out. And it's obvious now because it just goes and it's crazy how much he's pushing it.
Yeah.
And like I used to assist Brendan O'Brien a bunch, and he would
he's an amazing mixer.
He would just be walking around just pushing stuff up, all the time. If you've ever heard the term slippery fader, or like that's the master fader trick where like you start the entire mix down like a dB or two, and when you hit the chorus, you throw it up. So the whole chorus just jumps a dB. That was an old trick we would do on the desk all the time. And it's just like, it's so easy, I think, to get complacent in the box of not, especially if you don't have any faders, which I don't, because I can't really, because I monitor post conversion. So it's almost impossible to do anything in time, but I still do. I'll still ride stuff. And then I'll just like, I kind of just gotten used to writing it before it happens, which is really weird, but,
interesting.
Yeah. Like that whole part of the performance of mixing, I think, is really important, and I think it goes such a long way when you may not even know it's happening. You just know something's happening. You don't know what
you can feel the energy movement.
Exactly.
I was watching this video of Michael Brower doing demonstrating a mix or whatever. I don't even remember what it was for. It might have been Sonic Scoop or something, and like. Just watching him riding the faders was like an art. It was like me playing my bass or something. You know what I mean? It was like that kind of like musicianship almost, and it was pretty beautiful. And when we're in the box, it's just not intuitive. Like it's it doesn't. Your brain doesn't want to do that. Your brain wants to kind of like find good levels and write in automation and
well, and you're also it's just. You're kind of limited because at least I feel like I'm always only being able to focus on one thing at a time, wherever the mouse is,
Right.
Whereas when you're at a console, you're like, your left hand can be on the drums, or especially with VCAs, you have the whole freaking band right in front of you. You can literally mix the entire song, every instrument on the 8 faders in front of you, like at a big console. So it's just a different way of, of kind of focusing your brain, basically, where you're just kind of like on one thing.
Yeah,
it's a bummer.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Do you find it difficult to send mixes off for mastering, given what we've talked about, with dynamics and stuff? Like, do you find like it doesn't always translate, or do you find it you have somebody they work with that you like the way it's done, or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that transition?
Well, I don't really. My mixes are not loud. Like what I deliver, what I give to the client, yes, I'll throw a limiter on and make it louder, but even that's not that loud. I honestly, like, I just work on it till I like the way it sounds, and I think it sounds good. And I don't really like compare it to something as far as loudness goes because I know there's an extra step, and I don't want to get caught up in that. And as far as it comes to mastering, and most of the time I'm working with people that I know, like Ian. I probably only have like 3 or 4 people that I use. So I kind of know what to expect from them. And if they need something from me, they'll ask me. But yeah, I don't go crazy with it. Like I'll print my mixes with like at least 60 dB of headroom before, I'll plenty of headroom. And a lot of times like people appreciate that. I think they like that. I have had a couple times where I'll give them my ref mix out, and then the client will come back to me and be like, our mastering guy isn't, like, there's something that he just can't get it. Like, it's like that, your dynamics, the energy, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, do you mind sharing, what you did with us? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing anything. I'm literally pulling up like a Pro L2 and just turning the gain up. Like, there's no trickery at all. And I think sometimes what happens is like, I think people try too much, they're like, oh, we got to do all these things. And it's like, do we, does it really need that? Which I'm guilty of myself, So I don't know. I try to make it the best that it can be, leaving me expecting that it should be getting better. I'm not one of those people where it's like, I don't want it to go to mastering and sound different, like, of course it needs to sound different. That's why it's happening. Like, why are we doing this otherwise?
Totally.
So, and most of the time it sounds good. But a lot of times for me, it's like, I like bottom end, especially I just like a lot of bottom end and things. And sometimes even in like genres that maybe it doesn't need to be that big. So sometimes I'm like, can we just get a little bit more back? Cause they're obviously cutting some stuff to get stuff loud.
Yeah, of course.
But
it's a bummer. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's like the loudness thing is like, yeah, it may be in a playlist with something else, but like if someone really likes the song, they don't care. They're just going to turn it up or,
right. Same way you're leaning in to hear that word that you couldn't quite make out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
if you really like the music, you'll turn it up. It's a better feeling than turning it down,
And it's also like, we're not saving lives here. Like this isn't rocket science, like there's not a lot on the line as far as like, if your mix isn't or your master's not as loud as someone else's, it's like no one's gonna die at the end of the day. Like we're here because we should be doing this because we like doing it and we enjoy the music we're putting out. So yeah, I don't know. I try not to worry about it too much.
Excellent. I'm gonna try not to worry about it either. It's easier said than done. It's interesting because so many people are just so caught up in it, and I think mostly in the pop world, because I think in the pop world that stuff still really it matters.
That's a very, very good point. It's a different scene there where it's like, yeah, it's exactly right.
Yeah, but in the in the indie world or whatever, like, yeah, it really doesn't matter, and there's normalization and. Which I think makes it sound worse often. Like I turned off the normalization on Spotify, and I think you can hear more fidelity. Not that it's so high fidelity. Yeah. Like I don't know what they're doing exactly, but
I don't know what any of them are doing. It's like frightening when you like jump from platform to platform and things sound so different. It's like where's the baseline? Like what is real? Yeah.
We're living in a weird. I don't know. I actually read an interesting post on Facebook recently. It was like now is like the most important time to take audio seriously because everyone's like 20 years ago people were okay with like 128 kilobyte per second MP3s.
Yeah.
And like earbuds, and now people are buying these AirPod Pros or whatever they are, and so people are spending a lot more money on headphones, and music is love it or hate it, but Atmos is becoming a thing, or maybe not becoming a thing depending on your genre or whatever. And so like now's the time to actually think about audio because it is getting better supposedly. And I never thought about it like that because I'm still in that like that meme of like the big console, the fancy microphone, blah blah blah, it turns into like 99-cent MP3
right
with like the earbuds. I don't know if you remember that meme.
But, yeah, I mean it's interesting you said that because I had this conversation with a friend a couple months ago, a buddy of mine who's also an engineer. We go hiking a bunch, and I was talking about how like you put all this work into something. Like we're talking about like music from like the actual recording that goes onto a streaming service, if that's the product, which it isn't, the end game is like, shows and the artist development and merch, like the actual, it's just a means to an end, the actual recording. But if you think of it as like that's the actual end game, like the way that you would design a household product that you sell, on the shelves, it's like we do all this work for this thing that comes out that nobody pays any real money for, which I think is very depressing when you think about it that way.
Oh yeah,
because it would be very
rough.
easy to be like, well, who cares? It's like it literally has no value on its own, but it's everything that's attached to it. It's the interaction
tour
from all that other stuff.
It really is nuts. It just speaks volume to how important recorded music is, I think, because like artists haven't really been making money from recorded music for a very long time now, and it's like, but we still like fuss over it, and the artists still fuss over it, and it's just like,
well, it's the first
matters,
fuel in the fire. Yeah, it's the first igniter in the engine of their career and their artistry. It's like that has to be right, at least by their.
But I would say
mind.
it's also the last. Like I would say, like it's like the tour is bringing in the money, but people are going to remember the record and listen.
Right?
Back to the record.
Yeah.
Like it should be the thing that costs money, I think.
Yeah.
And it was for.
30, well, it's the thing that costs money. It's the thing that costs money, but it doesn't make money.
Yeah. It's all backwards, man. I don't know how to solve that. That's beyond me.
Yeah.
It's a true bummer. And I really don't envy artists. That is a hard road. Like I
would never want that. I like being in the background. I don't need to be on front and center.
Yeah. And just like you said, you hate doing the social media stuff. Think about how much of that crap you have to do if you're an artist, and just.
I mean, you have to be it's like you have to be the right personality. It has to be in your bones, and you have to really want to do it. I mean, that's just you can't half-ass that. It's just impossible.
Well, so in terms of mixing, like how are you monitoring your mixes these days? Like what is, I'm assuming you're in a treated room. Are you mixing on monitors? I'm assuming not headphones.
Yeah, I'm in a treated room. It's not like 1,000,000% scientific, but basic panels and stuff like that. It sounds pretty good in here. I have a pair of ATC SCM20s, which are the 2-ways, non-ported, so you need a sub, and I have a little KRK sub. And I monitor through a what's this thing called? Benchmark DAC1, which is just a 2-channel converter. I used to use the converters on my Apollo, but I just felt like when they got pushed a certain level, they just didn't sound very good. And I have like old Apollos. I still have like first generation Apollos. But so I use the AES out of my Apollo 16 into the Benchmark for my stereo monitoring. It sounds really good. It's just like a nice hi-fi converter, really clean. Yeah, and then I just have a dangerous monitor. That's pretty much it. I do have a little mono Avantone off to the side that I'll listen to. I used to have Proax. I used those for a long time, but those are now on my turntable at home where they belong because they're hi-fi speakers and they sound great. Yeah, I use headphones kind of at the end of the day, to check stuff. It's easy to hear like mouth noises, things like that, like maybe some weird cymbal hit that you missed. I don't really generally like mixing on headphones. It's a bit exhausting sometimes.
Yeah,
and there's just like they're just too wildly different. Like I don't think they don't translate as well for me. I use them more for a bit of quality control. I will like listen on my earbuds, later that night if I'm still in progress on a mix or something at home. And I just have like those Beats ones only because I got them for free and they have Atmos. And I've gotten used to them. They have a lot of bottom end, but I've gotten used to them. They're actually quite nice.
Right. You have to get the beat. You have to get used to that Beats EQ curve. It's like something bizarre about it.
Yeah. Well, when I was working for Rich, he was consulting with them and kind of helped them redesign their line.
No way.
Because the old beats, like the old Dre beats, I hated. They were so woofy and boomy.
It was like 100 hertz boost or something. It was like something.
It was insane,
some gnarly. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was consulting with them like right after I think Apple bought them, and so like a lot of the like Beat Studio Pros and stuff have a lot of people's inputs, but he was one of them, and they do sound much better. But the little earbuds, what are they called? Power Beats. They're nice. They're great for the plane, and they have Dolby Atmos built in, so they have that, blah blah blah, whatever. But it's like I'll go home and make dinner if I'm still working on something, and maybe listen to it and just be like, oh yeah, I like listening to rough mixes of productions on earbuds because I think sometimes you get more inspired because you hear stuff like literally inside your head, which is kind of fun. But but yeah, the ATCs are my main thing. I have them on some of those giant Soundmaker stands, that whole thing. I don't have a desk. It's just I have literally a piece of wood with legs screwed into it where my laptop and my computer monitor are and my hard drives. And then I have a little rolling cart for my keyboard, my mouse, my monitor controller. I got rid of the desk.
Interesting.
I used to have a big old desk with gear in it and stuff. And my old studio mate, Kean Reardon, who worked on like the St. Vincent records and stuff, he came by one day and we were talking about desk reflections and stuff. And I started putting things on the desk and I was like, oh my God, this is like, there's so much stuff changing. So I just I tore it apart, put everything in all my gear. And I just have 2 racks or 2.5 racks over here with all my stuff in it. And I don't see the point of ever going back to anything like that unless it's a console. Like,
That's like Jesse Ray Ernster who has like this like lap.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Jesse's a bit extreme with that, but I mean it's pretty close to that.
I mean it makes sense. Like you have like also like if you have like a glass monitor, also like you have so many reflections from that.
Yep.
I'm actually excited. I'm gonna hopefully get a new computer at some point, and I'm on an iMac now, but hopefully the next monitor won't be such crazy glass. It'll be like a more lo-fi monitor, and that probably won't be as bad.
Yeah, mine's definitely way too far away from me. Like I'm like leaning in, especially because it's 4K. I'm just like looking pretty hard sometimes, but it's fine. I really enjoy it, and I love these speakers. They're just I bought them in I guess 2019, and I was just demoing them. And I was like, if I can mix faster and better on these, I'm going to buy them. And that's absolutely what happened. It was just like, it took out so many guessing steps.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. I feel like everyone finds their speaker and like, no matter what it is,
I think whenever you upgrade your speakers, it just ups everything. Like I upgraded to these Focals. They're nothing fancy. They're like the Focal shaped twins. They're not like the most expensive Focals or anything. But I was working on like, I hate to say it, but like HS80s before that. And it was just like, oh, everything is easier. I'm mixing so much better. Like everything is translating better. And just like my work got just like, I got more work. Like life got better after I got these speakers. And like, I was like, I knew I needed these for a long time and I saved up for a little bit, you know what I mean? Like the whole thing, but just getting better speakers just makes such a massive difference. And in terms of like the desk thing, I have a glass desk, which I probably shouldn't have. Yeah, no, but I got like this like desk cover, it's like like these like for people that like write in notebooks or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like a faux. I'm not sure if it's leather or faux leather. I put it on it. All of a sudden, like the whole room sounded so much better just because like I eliminated so many reflections.
It's crazy. When I'm on my old desk, I was like, I bought these like, foot by foot. I guess they're 1/4 inch like dense foam, like stuff you'd see like hung up in a doctor's office. I bought like a stack of those off Amazon and I'm like putting them all over the desk. And I was like the low mids were like changing. And I was like, oh my God, like the bass sounds, it was crazy how different it was. And Kean, who used to work with Eric Valentine, he was talking about how all of Eric's consoles, all the metal is perforated. Like there's holes in it. So that
I saw that on Pizzado's place like a decade ago or something.
Yeah. He was the one that convinced me. But yeah, these speakers, Rich had a pair of these passive ones just sitting in storage. And I was asking him about it. I think one of the drivers was broken. And he was like, oh yeah, I haven't used those in years. And he was like, maybe we should order a new driver. So I ordered a new driver from ATC, got it in, replaced it. And I think I took them home to just break them in a little bit. And he let me borrow them for like a week, and I had them on my Bryston. His were passive, and I loved these. And I was like, "Why aren't we using these?" And I was like, "Because he was on, I don't remember what we were on, PMCs or something." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I mixed like all the records in like the early 2000s on those speakers." And I was like, "Okay, so you mean like all of the like most amazing, cool records?" I was like, "All right, cool." So then I just demoed some and got them, and I was like, and now he's back on ATCs. He's on the big ones though, like 50s or something like that.
Yeah.
I like these a lot. I've tried the 25s, which everyone has.
Yeah.
And I went with these on Rich's recommendation. I won't lie about that. And they're a little bit cheaper, but also there's something about like the 2-way versus the 3-way where the crossovers just seem a bit tighter. But you do need a sub because these aren't ported, so the low end roll off is pretty significant.
Right. The 25s probably get down to like 40 hertz, and these probably only get down to like 60 or 70 or something.
Yeah, if even that, and depending on the room you're in, whatever the node is in your room, you may not hear anything. But the 25s are great because you don't even need a sub with those in the right space. These I felt like I definitely needed one, but I have friends that have 25s that come and listen to mine, and they're like, oh man, there's something different about these. Even though it's all the same components, there's just something different about it. But
they're special.
I like them a lot. I think they're really great. And I thought they're just like utilitarian. They're just black speakers. There's no DSP. There's no lights. There's no like literally just workhorse speakers. That's it. I like that about gear. I don't like stuff that's too sparkly.
Yeah, it's like the NS10s, but not as legendary or not as harsh or whatever. Yeah. Excellent. Wait, I actually wanted to ask you one more thing about drums. Like when you're working on these kind of more indie records, do you find that you're doing sample replacement in the mixing stage, or are you basically leaving things how they were tracked?
It depends. If it's something that I haven't recorded and I feel like it's lacking, then I'll add something. That's kind of generally my approach to samples. Like I don't just put stuff in to put stuff in. But a lot of times if it's a production, like there's one song off the Ultra Q EP where we were tracking it and everything about the drums sounded cool because I was heavily distorting them and compressing them, but the bass drum was too much. And I was like, just don't play the bass drum, we'll just trigger it, or play it and I'll just mute it and we'll use I think I used a Drum Tracks bass drum, which are really cool old, like really punchy drum sounds. And they were like, okay, cool. Like they didn't care. Like, so a lot of times I'll make that decision pretty early on, if it's a production. But yeah, I just generally put something if it needs it, like, especially if a client's like, I want it to sound like this. So I'm like, all right, well, whatever you brought me sounds nothing like this is a different instrument, so we need to add something else, which is always, that gets tricky because you've got this like amazing snare sample and then you've got all the bleed and the overheads and rooms that sound not the same. So I try to shy away from that if I can, but if it needs something, usually it's it's a tonal thing, right? Like the kick drum needs more mid-range punch. It wasn't recorded with that, and EQing it isn't helping because it's just not there, So then I'll find a sample that kind of fills that EQ frequency rather than something that just creates a whole new drum, I kind of think of it that way.
Using it for like enhancement, not for replacement, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of what everyone does these days. It's unless someone sends you something that was already done on like Superior Drummer, and because there's literally no real drums. But yeah, it's always it's a tool. It's not necessarily an instrument replacer anymore, at least for me.
Yeah. And in terms of like getting the kick drum to feel like you feel it in your chest, I don't know. Do you have like a go-to EQ or something that you do to kind of get that low end out of that kick?
Well, I always high pass my compression on the drum bus, on the mix bus. I let a lot of bottom end come in without hitting the detector so that it's not reacting to that.
Amazing.
My mix bus compressor has a side chain filter button. I don't know exactly where it is. I'm guessing it's probably like 80 or 100. But on the Zener, there's a high pass that you can engage there. So I generally always, if it's drums, I'm usually always letting a lot of sub frequencies through before they get compressed. And honestly, like I use the Brainworks E channel, the SSL. They're the one they did with all the channel modeling. Because I'm just used to SSLs. That's what I came up learning. And that one to me feels the most like a console. Yeah. And those EQs and compressors are just so familiar to me now. It's just like, I just know them so well. I kind of always go to that. It really doesn't matter what I'm doing. Those are on probably every drum track. Sometimes I'm not even doing anything, just on because I like the that whole modeling thing where you can hit random and it'll change which channels it is.
Right.
When that first came out, I sat there for hours just like whoa, that's like just switching that button can change like where the snare sits or where the kick drum sits, like because it's all like subtle phase changes, which again goes back to the whole summing thing of like this randomness.
That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about summing. Actually, I had a whole conversation with this guy.
I have on my sub outputs. I have those channel strips on those as well, just doing nothing, no EQ, no compression, but just doing the randomness. So it's like it's just more. I think the more of that you can involve in your setup, it just like it creates more of like an analog-y feel because it's like, all right, this is stereo, but like the left and the right are slightly different because something's different about this channel on the console. So you just get more of that stuff.
Yeah, I was talking with an engineer named Dan Silberman who's out of Chicago, and he was talking about using all these things to kind of get faux, out of the box stuff in the box of like, relying heavily on those kind of like, the Plug-in Alliance, bus channels and all that stuff, and just the randomness of it all.
Yeah, what's it called? TNT modeling? Is that what they call it? Whatever that.
I think THT.
THT or something like that. Whatever they did, that was like the first time when I was like, oh, this is some next level stuff. Like 72 different channels. That's pretty cool. It
is dope. And I think all of their channel strips have that. Not to shout them out too much, but like they also have like the Focusrite and
the Neve and
the G channel. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
they have that weird desk.
The J also. They have the J.
The J now.
That's like the Michael Brower one, I think. Yeah. So there's like so many options in the box also, I guess. But it's cool that you do that and you also do the analog summing, so you get as much as possible.
As many transformers as I can go through as I try to.
Yeah. Well, one last question about mixing and the sounds that I heard like a lot of really cool distortion on the tracks that I listened to. What makes you reach for distortion, or saturation or something? And do you have any like go-tos for any specific instruments?
God, that's so specific to like what I don't know if I could remember.
Maybe we could play the Saw segment, and maybe you'll have an idea from there.
Yeah, that would probably be. I'm so bad at remembering things.
Amazing, awesome. So let's jump over to the Saw segment. We talked about this band called Ultra Q. So you sent me a track called "It's Permanent." So let's listen to that for about 90 seconds, and we'll chat a little bit about what went into it. Sound cool?
Cool.
Yeah, Martin, sounds really cool. I really love the bass tone, like like I don't know what's going on there, and the drums, like I don't even know what's going on. It sounds like a drum machine, but it's not exactly a drum machine, I'm assuming. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that track.
So that track, I sent you. I kind of picked that one because it's kind of weird and it was a lot of fun to make, and we basically like plowed through that thing in almost a day when we were making this EP. So that drum track, I guess if you want to start with the drum track, they were referencing this band Molchat, which is this weird Russian like kind of goth band. We were referencing a lot of like Cure and like that kind of level of stuff for this record. And so they had a beat in mind, and then I just basically found some cool samples and programmed that, and then ran everything through I think it was Audio Thing Wires, which is a model of an old wire recorder where they would literally like electrify a piece of wire to record to. It's like very early recording technology. And it's weird enough, Rich actually owned one of those, and we used to use it as a delay sometimes. It never worked. But these guys modeled it, and it just has this very lo-fi, almost, like Iron Curtain feel to it. It's very kind of depressing sounding. So we used a lot of that on that thing. And so then what I had the drummer do is I had him play on top of that completely. I can't remember if we overdubbed cymbals separately or if I think we did kicks and snares and then cymbals separately because it was so busy.
Yeah.
And then I would just mix in certain elements of the live kit on top of the programming. So like it comes in the chorus, the second verse, things like that. And that was all some wacky, I think most of that was like distortion through one of my overstair boxes through the room mics or something, which were very close to the kit. So they weren't boomy. It was just like this kind of weird it's just kind of one of those things. I turned it on and I was fiddling with knobs, like, oh, this sounds really cool. Let's just go, and we just did it, kind of thing. There wasn't a ton of afterthought in that drum sound.
Yeah, it seems to be the way to do it, not to overthink it, just to go for it, you know?
Yeah. The bass is all DI through the overstayer module channel, completely DI. There's no amp. What's cool about this box is it has these kind of MS-20 style filters on it that are highly resonant. So you can actually like turn the resonance up and it'll self-oscillate, and you can find like the real fundamental frequency of something. Great on drums. So you can make the smallest kick drum sound like an 808 like instantly. It's insane. But with the bass, I was able to find like kind of the more guttural fundamental part of it, and then the distortion is all from that as well. It's got 3 different modes of distortion, and it's all modular, so you can feed the distortion circuit into the compression circuit or vice versa. You can EQ the side chain of the compressor with the EQ. It's really, really cool. And I think most of the guitars on that record are all DI. Later on in the song, there's a bridge part where like there's this kind of picked half acoustic, half electric thing. And we were like working on it in the studio, and I loved how the string sounded. So we ran I think it was a Strat through the amp, through the speaker simulator, or maybe that was speaker simulator. And then I also mic'd the strings at the same time with like a 57 or something, so that we heard this kind of acoustic thing. And when that musical part repeats itself in the end, then we actually layered acoustic guitars underneath it. Like really compressed, kind of thinned out, sparkly acoustics. And I think the entire guitar package has a filter that just slowly opens on it as it kind of blossoms into the end. That was one of my favorite moments on that little EP. It's just really cool, really pretty sound.
Yeah. Movement,
and just a lot of like...
movement and dynamics. That? It's like back to movement and dynamics, you know?
Exactly. And that whole song is just covered in like weird spring reverb stuff from another audio thing plugin called Springs, which is one of the best collections of spring reverbs in my opinion. They're just all sound so cool.
This is a plugin.
Yeah, the company called Audio Thing. They make a bunch of just weird stuff, but it's all so useful. Really, really cool things, and they're all really cheap.
I'm gonna check that out because I've been hearing great things about spring reverbs recently, and I don't even know if I don't think I even have a plugin that does a great spring reverb. So
Springs is it? They have like the big ones called the Great British Tube. That was like all the Portishead records were done on that. They have like all the Roland stuff, all the Fender stuff. Like
I have to check this out.
Yeah, they sound so good. I use those on everything. I don't have a real spring because usually they're just, you gotta have them isolated somewhat, you know. And they'll rattle it. But they're great for recording, like tracking with.
Yeah, spring reverbs are really dope. I was going to ask you also about that vocal effect. It's like super chaotic, and like the effect is almost louder than the vocal itself. It's like getting drowned in this delay. Like, do you remember what happened there?
Jacob, the singer, was like really into being like almost inaudible, and he wanted just tons. I think it's mostly Echo Boy. I think I use Echo Boy a lot because it just sounds great and it's easy. I think it's mostly Echo Boy, and I may have some kind of like compression on it, that side chain, so that it clamps a little bit during the vocal and then it opens back up and blossoms. And then there's a bunch of throws where stuff's being thrown, and I think I had like little altar boy doing some like pitch shifting on it, things like that. And then like those little breaks between the words and stuff. But yeah, he liked a lot of that. There was a lot of that and a lot of reverb. And just, like very chaotic.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what we were trying to do.
Amazing. Well, it's this record definitely has a lot of good vibes on it. I dig it, man. And I love what you're doing. You've done some great records. So, yeah, congrats.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, totally. Amazing. So as I like to, eventually bring the interview to a close, I want to ask some more like kind of generalized, less music related questions. I guess it's all music related, but we all have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio, and then there's days where we're not as excited. How do you stay, hyped to get in the studio? Do you have any routines, any habits, anything you do to kind of, get in the zone?
This year has been weird because like this year's been like I've been like busy and then slow and then busy and slow. It's definitely been ebbed and flow. So this year's actually been really hard for me to get into a routine. That being said, if it's something I've had a couple like long projects that have kind of been coming and going throughout the year. And I don't know. I generally just try to kind of feel, just kind of let my brain tell me. Like if I go into work and I'm like not focused, I'm tired, or I'm getting bored with what I'm doing, I just stop. I just, unless it's some time sensitive thing that I actually have to get it done that day, which is not really, pretty rare these days. But if I'm not engaged completely into what I'm doing, I just don't do it. Like there's no point in being there and wasting the time for me, And sometimes that means I go home and I have lunch and like I go have a coffee with a friend and then I'm back at it, Or sometimes I take the rest of the day off and do something else productive, like clean or do laundry, like I don't like being in the studio and it not being an engaging experience. I just think that's a waste of time for me. And like, there's no point in like starting to work on something, because I've done that before where I've been unfocused or I've been tired or, not fully in it. And I just find that I start digging myself into a hole because I'm trying to like, my actions are a representation of me not being engaged. And then if I do that, I got to come back the next day and then get myself out of that hole and basically just undo everything I did. So I just kind of go off the point of like, if I'm not feeling it, I'm just not going to do it. And that generally works for me. I've been going to a lot of live shows recently, and that's just gotten me excited about music in general, like different genres, different bands, but just going and like, there's this LA band called Muna that I went and saw last week, and their records are very pop and very clean and slick, and they sound great, but them as a live band, they're so good. And I went to go see them here in LA, and like I've never been to a show where like every single person in the audience was singing every single word to every song, like louder than the stage volume. It was nuts. It was so electric. It was so cool. And like I'm admittedly like I know their singles and stuff. I don't know every word to every song, but I had just had so much fun because everybody else was having so much fun. It was such a good energy. But yeah, I think that's inspiring too. And listening to things.
It's cool.
Seeing things.
It's cool how like I think after COVID and everything that's happening in the world with current events and stuff, it's just like we're in like such a zone where we need that, like you mentioned how guitar music is coming back. I think we need that kind of energy again in our lives of like, the world is kind of fucked up, so we need that like that like music to have that like to be a little jarring, to be a little bit intense. And
I think that's exactly it. Like I feel like, especially young people these days that are in their late teens, early 20s, that like have kind of come to their adulthood in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Like they're getting to a point where if they do have that artistic ability, they want to express themselves, and maybe they're mad or they're upset about what's happening. And like, I mean, I think that's probably difficult to do that on a laptop with Ableton. I couldn't just imagine plugging a guitar for the first time and like turning everything all the way up and hitting a power chord must be such an amazing feeling. Obviously I'm not discounting songwriting and pop and all that kind of stuff, because it's very powerful in its own right. But if you want to lash out, it's much probably more, in my opinion, appealing to do so with your friends in a room being as loud as possible.
Yes.
And I think I think that's why a little bit of that's coming back, and obviously you see it trending in other areas of music. I mean, in a way, like
like the guitar-driven tracks on like the Olivia Rodrigo record or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But there's there's like I said, there's nothing better than going and seeing like people play loud music together. It's so cool and it's so rewarding.
Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah, gotta go out and see more shows, right?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a great year to do it because everyone started touring early and everyone is still touring. It's nuts that people are like going back out in like the first week of November. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, well, people want to see their favorite bands.
Yeah.
So I guess it's paying off for the records that aren't making any money. So yeah, full circle again. Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I guess that just leaves me with my final question of the show, which I ask everybody on. And my editors told me I have to stop saying I recently rebranded it, but I recently rebranded it as like kind of advice for people coming up. but basically just looking back on your journey, was there something that you either did right or something that you did wrong and you regret having not done it a different way or whatever that you'd want to impart on somebody who's at the beginning of their journey? Be like, yo, keep at that. It's going to get you where you want to go. Or maybe don't do that. It's holding you back. What would be that like one piece of advice?
Well, I think that early on in my career, I kind of had a specific mindset of like how things were supposed to go. And I think that was like my kind of knowledge of like, oh, you go work in a big studio and you work on these records and you meet people and eventually someone hires, and I kind of modeled my path after that. And obviously that's not happening these days, and I don't think young people are experiencing that these days. But I wish I would have taken a few more chances when I was younger. Because there's like you really don't have any concerns, right? I mean, unless you're young and you're married and you have a family, but that was not my case. I wish I would have gone out on some more limbs and tried. I don't have any specific examples, but just like let myself think out of my own box more.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it's very important also to stay true to what you believe and not do something just because it's a good paying gig or it's trending or whatever. Like I've turned down like what would have been highly lucrative gigs because I just wasn't into it. And I think that's important. Like I don't think you still want to be having fun and enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I just feel like there's no rules anymore. And I think my kind of time working in big studios was like the very end of that there's some rules left stage. And so I was kind of came up through that mode, and now there's no rules. Like you can make anything you want with one microphone and a laptop, and it could be, I mean, I think I was doing some Atmos prep for Rich. He's mixing the wait, hold on. I don't want to say that because I don't know if it's out yet.
Okay, so we'll make an edit point here.
Yeah. I think a good example is Foster the People, Pumped Up Kicks, that song. Like that entire song is Mark Foster's demo on his laptop. Like that's his mix. Like other people tried to mix that.
Really?
I know Rich did a mix of it. Yeah,
that's crazy.
They tried to get other people to mix it, and what came out is what was from his Logic session, and they just got it mastered. Like, and I think that is probably the first real example of a smash hit bedroom pop, alternative production that I can think of that was on that level that then propelled an artist into stardom. So, like it. I don't know. Just I think people should have fun and do what they're doing, but not be, don't be confined to what you think is the right way to do things. I guess. I wish I would have been more like that.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I feel like we're an interesting generation. Like I guess I'm assuming if you're around Travis's age, you're just a couple of years older than I am. But yeah, we're definitely like living through like transitionary periods.
Yeah, we didn't have this. I mean, I didn't have a smartphone until I was 25. Like
yeah. Well, how old was I when I got my? I was 24 when I got my smartphone. Yeah. Yeah,
like the first iPhone came out my second year in LA in like 2008 or whatever, 2000, I think. So yeah, like and so it wasn't a thing. Like we're definitely in that we're really pivot generation where like we're aware of it, we know it, but like. I can't keep up with like TikTok and things. Like it's too much for me even, I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm only, it's just like, I don't need that much at the end of the day. I appreciate it. I appreciate what it is. And like, I think it's a great platform for things like comedy and storytelling and things like that. But like, it's just a lot, but there's kids that have literally grown up with phones in their hands. So
honestly, I'm super glad I didn't. I feel like my brain would not be the same thing if I had. I feel like my attention span is like thanks to not having had that growing up,
Right. Yeah.
And but I might be wrong. But anyways, yeah, like it's definitely Also, but I have very similar feelings in terms of like regrets of like just like putting myself in boxes that I didn't need to put myself in, and just that I resonate with that. Like so many things we do. Also, when we're in our 20s, we don't know better than to kind of like, follow whatever seems like the thing to do. It's like you look back at the 20s as being the most free time of you could do whatever you want. There's no restrictions, but you don't have that knowledge yet, I think, in your 20s to kind of
Yeah, I think
break,
it's also
break free almost, you know?
It's such a personal thing too. It's like I think it's person to person. Like I find myself, well, I think I'm a supportive role kind of person, right? So like I'm not going to be the one that's going to be like, let's take a hard left turn here, unless I get that vibe from people. So I think some people have the ability to just do what they do, and some people don't because that's their personality type. But that being said, looking back, I was like, man, maybe I should have done this or done that, or been more this way about my approach to recording or mixing or whatever, But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to. It's what is it? Everything's
hindsight's 2020.
Hindsight in 2020. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, clearly it's whatever you did served you well enough. You've worked with some artists that I love. So yeah, that's really dope. And yeah, keep up the great work, man. This is really fun. I got a lot out of this. I enjoyed the schmooze. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. It's great.
Awesome, dude. Well, have a great one.